The night Marcus threw me out, it was raining. Not the soft kind. The kind that comes sideways, mean and relentless, soaking through your clothes before you even realize it's happening. I stood at the edge of our driveway, a single suitcase at my feet, and stared at the iron gate as it swung shut in my face. The clang of metal rang out like a gunshot. Neighbors' porch lights flickered on, one by one. I could feel their eyes. I didn't know who I was. That's the part nobody tells you about amnesia. It's not like forgetting where you left your keys. It's like waking up in the middle of someone else's life and being told it's yours. The doctors at Mercy General had explained it to my husband. Explained it calmly, professionally, with the kind of bedside manner that must have taken years to develop. Retrograde amnesia, they said, triggered by the trauma of the crash. She may recover some or all of her memories, but it will take time, some patience, and a stable environment. I remember the doctor's face when he said it. Dr. Calvin Reeves, a tall man in his early 50s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He looked at Marcus when he said, stable environment, like he already suspected what kind of man he was dealing with. Marcus Whitfield had always been the kind of man who looked good on paper. Tall, copper-skinned, the sort of jaw you saw on men in department store catalogs. He ran a real estate development firm, wore custom suits, and smiled like he was always posing for a photograph. At the wedding, my friends had said I was the luckiest woman alive. I had believed them. Now he stood on the other side of those iron gates, shoulders squared, jaw hard. I can't do this, he said. Not with grief, not with conflict, just flat, like he was canceling a reservation. You don't remember me, you don't remember our life, and frankly, I don't have the bandwidth for this. And you're not the woman I married anymore. I reached out and touched the gate with one hand. The metal was cold. Marcus! My voice came out soft, unfamiliar even to my own ears. Please, even if I don't remember everything, I know I love you. I can feel it. Something shifted in his face, but it wasn't softness. It was irritation. The kind you feel when someone won't take a hint. Camille. He said my name like punctuation. Go. Behind him, I caught a glimpse of a woman I vaguely recognized. High cheekbones, silk blouse, watching from the doorway with one hand resting on the frame. Her name surfaced in my fractured mind like a bubble. Renee. Renee Fontaine. She had been at our wedding. I remembered the photograph, or maybe I just remembered a feeling of her standing close to Marcus, too close, her laugh too loud in his direction. The gate didn't open again. I turned around. The suitcase was light. Marcus had packed it himself, which told me everything. A few changes of clothes, my toiletries, a small zippered pouch that clinked when I moved it. I didn't know what was inside yet. The rain had soaked through my jacket by the time I reached the corner. They'd told me the accident happened 3 weeks ago. A car collision at an intersection 3 blocks from our home. A driver ran a red light, and my sedan took the impact on the driver's side at 40 miles per hour. The paramedics had to cut me out. I'd been unconscious for 4 days. And when I finally opened my eyes in that hospital room, I had stared at the ceiling and felt like I was floating in open water, no shore in any direction. The walk from our gated community to the nearest bus stop was 20 minutes in good weather. In that rain, it felt longer. My shoes soaked through. I sat at the shelter and opened the zippered pouch with trembling hands. Inside was a small folded piece of paper. A broken locket, the chain snapped clean, and $200 in cash. The paper said, in handwriting I didn't recognize as mine, "If you ever need to find yourself, find Ms. Dorothy Wade, 1142 Clover Street, East Side." That was all. I sat in that bus shelter for 45 minutes before the number 7 came. A teenage girl with box braids and oversized headphones scooted over without being asked to make room. She didn't look at my tear-streaked face. I was grateful for that. Dorothy Wade turned out to be a woman in her late 60s with silver locks, reading glasses perpetually pushed up on her forehead, and a voice like warm syrup over biscuits. She ran a community resource center out of a converted Victorian house on Clover Street, a place that had once been a church, then a community health clinic, and now served as whatever people needed it to be. When I knocked on her door at nearly 11 o'clock at night, soaking wet, holding a broken locket and $200, she opened it without a word of surprise. She drew me a bath. She made me eat. She said, "Baby, you don't have to explain a single thing tonight." I cried so hard I couldn't breathe. Over the days that followed, Dorothy became something I didn't have a name for. Not quite family, not quite friend. Something older and more essential than either. See, she had a guest room with a quilt on the bed and a window that looked onto a small yard where tomatoes grew in raised beds. I would sit at that window in the mornings and try to remember who I was. The memories came in pieces, like photographs someone had torn up and scattered in the wind. I remembered the smell of a kitchen that wasn't Marcus's, warm and full of something cooking, a radio playing gospel. I remembered a man with laugh lines and big hands who used to quiz me on state capitals while I did my homework. I remembered the feeling of being deeply, unconditionally loved. I did not remember Marcus. Not really. Only the shape of him, the outline, the wedding, the house, the feeling that somewhere along the way I had confused his ambition for security and his beauty for depth. Dr. Reeves visited on the 4th day. He drove himself, which surprised me. He sat in Dorothy's kitchen. She had turned down the coffee she offered and looked at me with steady, serious eyes. "I want you to know," he said, "that your husband was informed clearly about your condition. Multiple times. What he did, that is not a medical outcome. That is a choice he made." I looked down at the broken locket in my palm. I'd been carrying it everywhere. Will I remember everything? I believe so. With time and safety. He paused. There's something else I should tell you. When you were admitted, the emergency contact in your phone, before your husband arrived, was someone named Clara Okafor, an attorney. She came to the hospital the first day. Your husband had her removed. I looked up. He had her removed? Dr. Reeves gave a careful nod. I thought you should know. After he left, Dorothy sat across from me with her hands folded on the table. She didn't rush me. The tomatoes in the backyard caught the afternoon light. A bird landed on the fence and stayed a while. Who is Clara Okafor? I finally said out loud, more to myself than to her. Dorothy reached into the pocket of her house dress and set a business card on the table. It was crisp, white, expensive-looking, embossed letters. Clara Okafor, Esquire, Estate and Trust Law. She came by the morning after Dr. Reeves called me, Dorothy said simply. She said when you were ready, she'd be here. I picked up the card. My hands, I noticed, had stopped shaking. Clara Okafor arrived the next morning in a charcoal blazer and sensible heels, carrying a leather portfolio that looked like it had survived a decade of courtrooms. She was in her mid-40s, Nigerian-American, with the kind of posture that made you sit up straighter without her saying a word. She shook my hand, sat down across from me at Dorothy's kitchen table, and opened the portfolio without preamble. Before I say anything, she said, so I need you to understand that what I'm about to share is confidential, legally protected, and entirely yours. Not Marcus Whitfield's, not his family's, yours. She met my eyes. Do you understand? I understand. Your great-uncle, Samuel Jerome Gay, passed away 14 months ago. She slid a photograph across the table. A man in his 70s, lean and elegant, standing in front of what appeared to be a beach house, squinting into the sun with a smile that looked like mine. He was estranged from most of the family, private to the point of being reclusive. He made his money in commercial real estate and private equity over 40 years. He never married. He had no children. I stared at the photograph. Something inside me stirred. Not a memory exactly, more like a current moving beneath the surface of still water. He left everything to you, Clara said. The estate, the holdings, the liquid assets, everything. It took 14 months to finalize because he structured it deliberately. A trust designed to remain sealed until you were, in his words, standing on your own, whether you know it or not. The room was very quiet. "How much?" I asked. Clara folded her hands. $512 million. The number didn't land the way I expected. I didn't gasp or cry or feel a sudden rush of relief. I felt, strangely, like someone had handed me back something that had always been mine, but had been held just out of reach. Like returning to a house you grew up in and finding your old bedroom exactly as you left it. "Marcus doesn't know," I said. It wasn't a question. "Your uncle was very deliberate about that. He hired private investigators years ago. He knew about Marcus. He knew about Renée Fontaine." Clara's voice was even, but something behind her eyes was not. He structured this trust specifically so that a spouse could not access, attach, or claim any portion of it. Not in divorce proceedings, not under any circumstances. He anticipated this. I thought of the note in the zippered pouch. "Find Ms. Dorothy Wade." My own handwriting, from before. Meaning I had known something was coming. Meaning some part of me had been preparing. Did I know? I asked. So, before the accident, did I know about the inheritance? Clara paused just long enough to tell me the answer was complicated. "You knew some of it. You reached out to me 6 weeks before the accident. You'd found some of your uncle's letters in your mother's things after she passed. You were beginning to understand the scope of what you stood to inherit, but we hadn't finalized everything. You were also, I believe, beginning to understand some things about your marriage." She closed the portfolio. Then the accident happened. Dorothy, who had been quietly making tea at the counter, set a mug in front of each of us without saying anything. I wrapped my hands around the warmth of it and tried to think. The man with the laugh lines in my fragmented memory. That had been Samuel, I realized. My great-uncle. He had visited when I was a girl, maybe 7 or 8. He'd brought me a book about women inventors and told me I had his eyes. My mother had been reserved around him, polite but distant. The family estrangement, Clara explained, had begun over something old and petty, an argument over their parents' estate, decades ago. Samuel had walked away and built his own world. He had watched mine from a distance. "What do I do now?" I asked. "You don't have to do anything immediately," Clara said. "The trust is secure. But I would recommend we begin moving quietly. The divorce will need to be filed. I have a colleague who handles family law. And there are business decisions, eventually, that will need to be made. Your uncle left you a functioning portfolio. People are running things on your behalf right now, but they need to hear from you eventually." I turned the broken locket over in my fingers. "He threw me out in the rain," I said. Not with anger, almost with wonder. He had no idea." Clara's expression was precise. No, he had no idea. What followed was not a movie montage of triumphant transformation. It was slow and unglamorous, and sometimes very hard. There were mornings when I woke up and the grief hit me before the clarity did. Grief for the marriage I had believed in, for the version of myself who had stood at that altar full of hope, for the memories I still hadn't recovered. There were nights when the amnesia felt less like a wound and more like a mercy, not having to relive everything all at once. Dorothy was a constant. She'd had her own losses, a husband gone too young, a son she prayed for daily, though they were estranged. She cooked, and she listened, and she did not offer advice unless asked. When she did give it, it was worth having. "Grief and healing don't take turns," she told me one evening while we shelled butterbeans on the back porch. "They happen at the same time. You don't finish one before you start the other." Slowly, carefully, things began to take shape. My memory returned in waves. Not all at once, more like the tide coming in, each wave reaching a little further up the shore. I remembered my mother, my childhood apartment in Atlanta, the smell of her perfume, the specific joy of a Saturday morning with nowhere to be. I remembered my first job, my college roommate, The road trip I'd taken at 24, with 3 friends and $40 between us. I remembered, too, the first time Marcus had made me feel small, the first time I had dismissed it, the long pattern of it, and my own willingness to blame myself. Dr. Reeves visited weekly. He tracked my progress with quiet satisfaction, the kind of satisfaction that came from genuine care rather than professional pride. His young resident, a woman named Dr. Aisha Kamara, began accompanying him. She was brilliant and direct and made me laugh, which I hadn't expected from neurology appointments. A woman named Priya Mathis arrived one afternoon, a forensic accountant Clara had brought in. She had thick-framed glasses and the energy of someone who genuinely enjoyed the work of untangling financial deception. She set a stack of folders on Dorothy's dining room table and walked me through what she'd found in Marcus's company records. He's been funneling investment capital into personal accounts through Shell LLCs for at least 3 years, she said, in the same tone another person might use to describe a recipe. There's also a significant transfer, roughly $8 million, into an account registered to René Fontaine's consulting company, which does not appear to have any actual clients or revenue. I stared at the documents. He was stealing from his investors. Systematically. Priya tapped the folder. Clara has shared this with a contact at the Financial Crimes Division. The wheels are already in motion, slowly but certainly. I thought about Marcus standing at those gates, so confident, so dismissive. The way he had said, "You're not the woman I married anymore," like it was an observation about a piece of furniture. I thought about Renee in the doorway, one hand on the frame. I did not feel angry exactly. I felt something quieter and more durable than anger. Clarity. The kind that settles in when you finally understand a situation completely and realize you no longer have to carry it. "What about Renee?" I asked. Priya exchanged a glance with Clara. "The money in her account creates legal exposure for her as well. She'll have decisions to make." A pause. "We understand she and Marcus have recently announced an engagement." I almost laughed. "Of course they have." "They're planning a gala," Clara added, "a showcase for his new development project. They don't know yet that the project's financing has been flagged." I set down the folder and looked out Dorothy's window at the tomatoes in the raised beds, red and heavy on the vine. "When?" I asked. "The gala is in 3 weeks." 3 weeks. I pressed my fingers together and felt the steady rhythm of my own pulse. I thought of Samuel Gay, the man in the photograph, squinting into the sun, leaving me everything because he had watched from a distance and decided I was worth betting on. I would not waste what he had left me. "Then we have 3 weeks to prepare," I said. The night of Marcus Whitfield's gala, I wore deep burgundy, not because it was dramatic, though it was, but because Dorothy had pulled the dress from a garment bag that Clara had sent over, held it up against the light, and said, "Baby, this is the color of a woman who has made up her mind." I hadn't argued. The venue was a restored ballroom in Midtown, all high ceilings and chandelier light, and the particular kind of ambient noise that expensive events make. The soft percussion of crystal glasses, practiced laughter, the rustling of fabric that cost more than it should. I arrived with Clara on one side and Priya on the other. Dr. Reeves had come too, at my request, not for drama, but because he had been part of the story from the beginning and deserved to see how it ended. I had been back in public for 2 weeks, carefully and quietly. My recovery was, by medical standards, remarkable. I still had gaps, likely would for some time, but the essential architecture of my life had returned to me. I knew who I was. I remembered my uncle, my mother, my own history. I had spent 3 weeks in deliberate preparation, legal briefings with Clara, financial walkthroughs with Priya, quiet conversations with Dr. Reeves about what it meant to confront trauma not as a victim, but as a person who had processed it. I was not here for revenge. I had examined that impulse carefully and found it hollow. Revenge asked you to remain defined by the wound. I was no longer interested in that. But there were things that needed to be said, and there were people in that room, investors, partners, community leaders, who deserved to know the truth before Marcus gave another speech about the future he was building. The room noticed me before Marcus did. I saw it happen in real time. The subtle shift in conversation. Eyes tracking toward the entrance, recognition rippling outward in a slow wave. Several people had known me before the accident. A woman named Gail, who had been a friend, walked straight toward me with wide eyes and both hands extended. "Camille, my God! You look—" She stopped herself. "You look like yourself again." "I feel like myself," I said, and meant it. Marcus found me 20 minutes later, heir in the way that people find things they're not looking for, by turning a corner and running into them head-on. He had a glass of champagne in one hand and Renee on his arm, and the expression on his face when he saw me was something I would have paid money to photograph. The specific sequence of surprise, recalculation, and poorly disguised fear. Renee's hand tightened on his arm. "Camille." He said my name the same way he always had, like punctuation, but the authority was gone out of it. "So, what are you doing here?" "I was invited," I said, which was technically true. The event was being partially underwritten by one of the investment groups in Uncle Samuel's portfolio. Clara had made a quiet call. Around us, people were listening. Not obviously. This was a room full of people practiced at, looking like they weren't paying attention while missing nothing. "This isn't appropriate," Marcus said. His jaw was doing the thing it did when he was working hard to maintain composure. "You should go." "I'm not going to do that." I said it without heat, without a tremor. Just simply. But I think there are some people in this room who deserve to hear a few things before the evening goes any further. "Camille." "Marcus." I looked at him directly. "You threw me out in a rainstorm with a broken locket and $200 and told me I wasn't the woman you married anymore. You were right, I'm not. I remember her now. I remember who she was. No, and I remember all the ways she made herself smaller to fit into your life. I won't be doing that again." The ambient noise had dropped significantly. Not to silence. The music still played softly, glasses still clinked at the far end of the room. But the radius of quiet around us had expanded considerably. I reached into my clutch and removed a single folded document. I held it out to Marcus. He didn't take it, so I set it on the high-top table beside us. "Those are the preliminary findings from a forensic financial audit of your company. Your investors, several of whom are in this room, have already been notified by their attorneys. Federal investigators have been in contact with your firm's general counsel since Tuesday." I paused. "I'd recommend you speak to a lawyer before the evening is over." Marcus had gone very still. Renee took a small, quiet step away from him. Just a half step, but noticeable. A man near the back of the room, one of the senior investors, a man named Harold Briggs, whom I recognized from before the accident, set down his drink. "Is this verified?" he said. Not to Marcus. To Clara, who was standing at my left shoulder. "Independently verified," Clara said. "I'm happy to provide documentation." The room shifted. Not dramatically. Real life rarely works the way movies do. There was no single gasping moment, no thunderclap. Instead, there was the slow, cellular restructuring of a crowd when its understanding of a situation changes. Clusters of conversation reformed. People found reasons to move away from Marcus. Harold Briggs walked directly to Clara and said something quietly. She handed him a card. Marcus said, his voice lower now, stripped of its performance. "You think you've won something?" "I'm not playing," I said. "I'm not interested in winning. I'm interested in truth. Those are different things." Renee, to her credit, was looking at Marcus now with an expression that was not entirely sympathetic. Whatever calculation she was running, it was no longer adding up the way it had. "Camille." His voice had changed again. Younger, stripped down, something almost genuine underneath it. "I was wrong. I know I was wrong. You were sick and You made a choice, I said. A clear one. I'm not here to punish you for it. I'm here because the people in this room deserve honesty, and because you built your reputation on a foundation of lies, and that has consequences that are no longer mine to absorb. I stepped back slightly, not retreating, just giving the moment room. I genuinely hope you find your way through what's coming, but I won't be part of it. I turned and walked back toward Clara and Dr. Reeves. The music continued. Someone laughed at the far end of the room. Life went on as it does. Marcus Whitfield was arrested 11 days later, at his office, now on federal charges of wire fraud and securities fraud. The case had been building for months. My appearance at the gala had not caused it, only confirmed it. His attorney released a statement. Renee's attorneys released a different statement. The news cycle chewed through it and moved on. I was not present for the arrest. I was in Dorothy's backyard, hands in actual soil for the first time, helping her put in a late crop of collard greens. She had decided I needed to learn something practical and useful, and she was right. There is something about the specific resistance of earth against your hands, the realness of it, that recalibrates things. Dr. Reeves called that afternoon to tell me what had happened. I said thank you and kept gardening. In the weeks that followed, I had long conversations with the team managing Uncle Samuel's estate. There were properties, holdings, partnerships that needed stewardship, not just management, but genuine vision. Samuel had built carefully and with purpose. He had structured things so that they could grow or be redirected, depending on what I chose. I chose to take a significant portion of the liquid assets and establish a foundation, the Samuel J. Gay Foundation, dedicated to housing stability and legal resources for women in crisis situations. Women who had found themselves, as I had, standing on the wrong side of a gate in a rainstorm with no map. The foundation partnered with community resource centers, places like what Dorothy ran, and with legal organizations that could provide the kind of help Clara had provided me. Dorothy was named to the board. She said she'd think about it, then called back 40 minutes later to accept. Dr. Reeves connected us with a network of clinicians who worked with survivors of trauma, and we built a mental health component into the foundation's structure. Because I knew, from the inside, that recovery was not just material. It was also about being seen and believed and told that your pain deserved kindness. Anna Reeves, Dr. Reeves's daughter, as it turned out, a law student in her second year who had an almost unsettling gift for research, began volunteering with Clara's office and eventually joined the foundation's legal team. She had a habit of arriving at meetings with 3 times as many notes as anyone else and asking the question everyone else was too polite to ask. I valued her enormously. Priya Matthews, who had untangled Marcus's finances with such relish, was brought on as the foundation's CFO. She described it as the most meaningful accounting work of my career, which I believed, because Priya was constitutionally incapable of saying things she didn't mean. The memories came back almost entirely by autumn. Not all at once, and not cleanly. There were still gaps, likely permanent ones, the neurological equivalent of scar tissue. But the essential narrative of my life returned to me. My childhood, my mother, my education, my choices, my mistakes. I could look at the full shape of the years and understand them. I thought about Marcus less than I expected to. When I did, it was without the charge of grief or resentment, more the way you think about a difficult stretch of road you once had to travel. It had been real. It had mattered. It was behind me now. The locket was repaired by a jeweler on Clover Street who worked out of a narrow shop with a green door and never seemed in a hurry. I wore it again. Inside, I'd had a small photograph placed. Samuel, squinting into the sun. And on the other side, a recent photograph of Dorothy's backyard in early morning, the tomatoes red and heavy, and the light coming in at an angle that made everything look like it was being introduced for the first time. I kept both photographs there as a reminder, where I came from and where I had landed. One evening in October, I was sitting on Dorothy's porch. It was my porch now, too, in the way that places you love become yours without paperwork, watching the street go quiet as the day settled. Dorothy came out with 2 glasses of sweet tea and sat in the other chair. And for a while, neither of us said anything. The air was cooling. Leaves were beginning to turn. Somewhere down the block, a child was being called in for dinner. "Your uncle would be proud," Dorothy said eventually. I thought about that. About Samuel Gay, who had built a fortune quietly and watched from a distance and left me everything he had because he believed, without ever being certain, that I would use it well. Sue, who had loved me from far away with a faithfulness I only learned about after the fact. "I think he might have been proud even before any of this," I said. "I think he left me the money not because of who I would become, but because of who he saw I already was." Dorothy considered this and nodded slowly, the way she nodded when she agreed with something and wanted to let it sit before responding. "Same thing," she said. The street was quiet. The tea was cold and sweet, so the locket rested against my chest and felt like exactly what it was. Something broken that had been put back together and was, somehow, stronger for it. I had been thrown out into the rain. I had been called nothing. I had been left in the street with a broken locket and $200 and the ragged edges of a life I couldn't yet remember. And I had risen. Not because of the money. The money was a tool, a responsibility, an inheritance from a man who had believed in me. I had risen because of Dorothy's warm house and Dr. Reeves' honest eyes and Clara's steady hands and the stubborn, persistent fact of my own survival. Because even when I couldn't remember who I was, my heart had kept its shape. Because sometimes the woman they call nothing becomes the very thing that changes everything. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the world gets to watch.